I don't believe in fate, except for when I do. And that may be why, when I first heard that Apple TV would be releasing episode 1 of Prehistoric Planet at 3 a.m. my time, we lost power in our home. I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to see episode 1 the millisecond it dropped. But as it turns out, the instant the power issue was resolved, I saw on Twitter that it actually had already dropped at midnight. Not even hesitating to contemplate the serendipity, I rushed to the TV and put it on right away. I've made no secret how excited I've been for this series. So excited, in fact, that I dusted off this old YouTube channel just to talk about it. Even after being burned so many times by so many different, much-anticipated media, my expectations couldn't have been higher. So how did the final show compare? Well, there is one major disappointment that sticks out immediately. Namely that it was over way too quickly and I have to wait a whole day before I get more. I know that may sound hackneyed, but it's the truth. It's a common truism in show business to always leave 'em wanting more, and Prehistoric Planet has left me positively starved. This was an excellent experience, one that not only left me in awe, but had me jumping out of my seat and tugging at my heartstrings. This is the first time in forever that I looked at a piece of visual effects and wondered, how did they do that? Prehistoric Planet brilliantly blends science, spectacle, and storytelling to produce something that is unrivaled in the last 2 decades. Only the original Walking with Dinosaurs could give this series a run for its money, and even then, the two are very different species. Before diving in, I'll preface this by saying that I'll be reviewing the series as a whole once it's finished airing. That's where I'll be talking more about general conventions such as the overall use and structure of the stories, or the use of cinematography as a means of grounding. In some ways, it's hard to evaluate a single episode of the series because there isn't just one story here. The episodes are broken up into a series of vignettes featuring different characters dealing with different struggles. The best way I can think to do it is to see how each segment stands on its own, and then see how well the episode does in tying them together, justifying the choice to juxtapose them in the chosen ways. The first segment pulls no punches, demonstrating very clearly what the show is. We see the sun rising over a beach and a single trackway leading from the sand to the water, with the episode's title fading in and out to introduce the subject. We cut to a close-up of one of the tracks, and Attenborough tells us that these footprints are from, quote, the land's top predator, unquote. The show is playing with the audience's expectations. We know from the narration that we're about to be introduced to T-Rex. But unless you're familiar with the show's promotional material, most audiences probably wouldn't expect the next shot, even though it's perfectly foreshadowed by the images we've seen up to this point. A Tyrannosaurus swimming at the ocean surface. Starting with T-Rex is about the safest choice the series could have made, but it makes sense given the plethora of more obscure taxa that are to come. But even though the show starts off with everyone's favorite dinosaur, it's shown doing something that will be new to many viewers. The show makes it clear from the beginning that this is going to be a very different kind of dinosaur show, even when it comes to a dinosaur everyone thinks they know. The first few shots only show a lone adult, but a few shots later we see that there are 5 chicks in tow, and Attenborough tells us that this is an adult male. The father, whom the internet has very firmly decided is called Hank, is leading his chicks to offshore islands for potential feeding opportunities, for them and for himself. Below them, giant sea turtles are seen peacefully drifting through the water. These are protostegid turtles, the same lineage that includes the modern leatherback sea turtle. These aren't meant to represent a specific genus, but are obviously reminiscent of the older Archelon. But just as we're getting acquainted with the family, we cut to an overhead shot and see the silhouette of a giant Mosasaur circling them just below the surface. A careless sweep of the Mosasaur's tail against the surface alerts Hank to its presence, and he ducks his head underwater to get a closer look. Once again, the show is attempting to subvert a general audience's perception of T-Rex as the ultimate predator. Here, in the ocean, even the king of the dinosaurs is dwarfed by the giant sea lizard. We can clearly see that one of the chicks is lagging behind, and lets out many distressed calls. We see the family approaching the shoreline, and it seems they may have reached safety, only for a huge wake to rise behind the slower chick and drag it helplessly beneath the surface. The shot is simple in its execution, but very effective. I hesitate to use the term Spielbergian, but as someone who's seen Jaws about 100 times, Bruce definitely came to mind. Hank turns around to look out at the still waters, and we see a close-up of his eye, which blinks slowly. While the music is definitely working to convey the idea of loss and sorrow, there's nothing in Hank's character animation that explicitly communicates those emotions. Nonetheless, there is still a strong sense of something going on inside his head. He made a choice to turn around and to look out at the ocean, and there is a powerful sense of purpose behind his eye. The ambiguity is great. It invites us to wonder what he's thinking and feeling, while not falling into the pitfall of anthropomorphization. This is one of the show's greatest strengths, the ability to show emotion without sacrificing its grounding in reality. But neither Hank nor the show dwells on this for long. He turns away and leads us to the next bit of action. He takes his young past a turtle heading back out to sea, and to another, much more dead turtle. I don't want to go on for too long about the visual effects because those largely speak for themselves, but I will say that I just straight up cannot tell if that's a life-size prop turtle that Hank is interacting with or an entirely CG asset. My favorite bit is when Hank is attempting to overturn the carcass. You can feel all the weight and power going into his motions, especially as his feet dig into the sand as the turtle resists him, his toes curling to maintain a foothold. But he eventually ends up turning it onto its back and takes a big old bite right into its belly, complete with bloody snout and strips of meat. The chicks, on the other hand, will have to find food elsewhere. They find it in the form of hatchling turtles emerging from the sand and racing to the surf. The inquisitive chicks can't help but play with their food, pawing at them with their feet and flipping them onto their backs, wriggling and flailing all the way. After one fails to snatch a baby turtle before a wave sweeps over it, the poor thing runs back to Dad as if looking for some kind of reassurance or counsel, but is ignored. The chicks engage in some welcome antics, stealing food from each other and chasing one another around the beach. There is a clear sense of personality to each chick, with some coming across as more confident and outgoing, and others more timid. The segment is working very hard to characterize T-Rex beyond its usual typecast as a movie monster. Here they are portrayed as not just animals, but individuals with distinct personalities. They undergo struggles and hardships. They suffer loss. They can be inquisitive and playful. Pretty much all the behavior we see them engage in is meant to subvert the usual ideas regarding Tyrannosaurus, and every part of the segment, the animation, the music, the narration, the story, all serve that purpose. The point is to make us believe, if only for the moment, that this is real, which means going beyond what people expect. This is the show's first impression, and if it doesn't win us over, nothing else matters. Luckily, it excels. Hank, his family, their whole world all feel real and lived in. Each of the animals is acting with its own sense of autonomy and motivation, emphasizing the feeling that the camera crew have simply stumbled upon them at this particular moment, in which all of their lives intersected. As the baby turtles head out to sea, we see footage of numerous real sea creatures, which is another technique meant to ground us in reality. It's the exact kind of footage you'd expect to find in any other BBC Earth documentary. This also helps to fill out the world, making it feel as rich and diverse as our own. We come ashore again in North Africa for a segment devoted entirely to pterosaurs. We open on a wide expanse of beach, which is filled with several different kinds, coexisting side by side to share the space. These include the Nyctosaurine, Barbadactylus, the Pteranodontian Tetradraco, and the Ashdarchid Phosphatodraco. Most of them are here to breed. and it's a remarkable spectacle. Pterosaurs provide an extremely different visual profile from T-Rex, so switching to them helps break up the episode. One excellent touch is the portrayal of different reproductive strategies even amongst very similar pterosaurs. While the Tetradraco look after their young and protect them from the probing bills of wandering Asdarchids, a nearby island houses a population of hatchling Alcyone, whose parents do not provide any kind of protection. The contrast helps to highlight the struggle of the Alcyone as they emerge from eggs buried in seaweed and scale the cliffs to reach the highest point. The scene is pretty harrowing, and I found myself flinching when one of the poor flaplings slips and nearly falls to a premature death. You can't help but root for the volant underdogs, born into a world without any help aside from each other. They even call to one another to coordinate their hatching. They look so helpless as they prepare their fledgling wings, and yet so daring as they launch themselves into the air mere hours after hatching. There are even hints of Ride of the Valkyries in the soundtrack. And if that wasn't enough, they also have to contend with Barbardactylus swooping down on them, taking advantage of the synchronized hatching for easy feeding. While many fall victim to their fellow pterosaurs, others survive and make it to a nearby forest, which provides them with shelter. We then transition from creatures of the sky to creatures of the sea, the Elasmosaur Tyrannosaurus. Many of the marine reptiles gather in a shallow bay, both to display to prospective mates and to swallow rounded pebbles to aid in ballast and digestion. The male Tyrannosaurus display by sticking their necks straight up out of the sea, yet another direct reference to Nature's all yesterdays. Again, the segment acts as a nice balance to the previous one. Elasmosaurs make for a very different image from pterosaurs, and the overall tone of the segment is relaxing. The music is serene, with hints of whale song. The Tyrannosaurus flies slowly and beautifully through the water, with the mated pair expelling bubbles as they court. I also can't not mention the image of a rainbow forming from the expelled breath of one of the animals. As the Tyrannosaurus head back out to the open ocean, we transition to our next segment. Again, we are treated to real-life footage of coastal reefs teeming with corals, sponges, and fish. This could have come right out of Blue Planet. Right up until a giant Mosasaurus emerges from the gloom. But just as the show makes us think that the creature is here to attack the helpless reef fish, it parks itself on a rock, opens its jaws, and is quickly swarmed by fish and crustaceans eager to feed on its dead skin. As far as visual effects go, this may be the single most impressive bit. We see close-ups of the fish and shrimp as they cover the Mosasaur, giving us a detailed look at its shedding skin. This isn't simply lizard skin. It's based directly on preserved Mosasaur skin impressions, and yet the real live animals seem to be feeding eagerly upon it. I really am struggling to think about how this was accomplished, but the serenity of the scene is interrupted when another Mosasaur arrives out of nowhere and challenges the old male to a fight over this territory. The young challenger has the advantage at first, but as the old male catches a breath, he drags the challenger down, and both of them are obscured in the darkness of the depths. We hold on the rising cloud of sediment for several breathless moments, and then we see one Mosasaur quickly dart away. Another few moments pass before we see the old male arise, victorious. While the fight between the males is pretty exciting, I think it's one of the weakest segments overall. This is partly because it feels unfocused. Is the purpose to show the grooming of the Mosasaur by the smaller animals, or is it the fight? The two elements don't feel well connected, and the fight almost feels like it was thrown in because we'd gone too long without any violence. A violent fight would have made for a good contrast to the Elasmosaurs, but then the grooming should have been cut. Perhaps it would have worked better if the reef was integrated into the fight as a motivator, i.e., the challenger is fighting specifically because this is the best spot to be groomed, and he wants it. Or perhaps we should have seen the fight first, with the reward being the opportunity to exploit this particular grooming spot. Another problem is that the scene lacks a good sense of scale. These are giant mosasaurs, about 50 foot each, but they appear small as they're encircled by the reefs. Lastly, there's a line of narration where Attenborough tells us that mosasaurs have been found with teeth embedded in their skulls from other mosasaurs. While that is true, a reference to fossils takes us out of the moment and reminds us that this isn't real. Perhaps this is why there isn't a clear transition from this segment to the next. Luckily, we return to form very quickly. While all the previous segments have taken place sometime during the day, this is the first to take place during the night. But the blackness of the night is pierced by the electric blue lights of bioluminescent scaphitid ammonites. Thousands of them. They rise from the depths for a courtship ritual on par with any modern natural spectacle. The entire ocean is alight with these magnificent creatures. Like a stellar ballet, great care has been given to the look of these animals, which all too often come across as background filler, despite being one of the most successful and prolific lineages of the entire Mesozoic era. Even in these alien creatures, there is purpose in their eyes, as a male and female approach one another, and their pulsating bodies harmonize perfectly. This is, quite literally, marvelous. But for all the magic of this spectacle, there is a great poignancy to it, as Attenborough informs us that this marks the end of their lives, and we cut to a sunrise of the beach as the waves carry 1,000 lifeless shells to the sandy shores. A beautiful juxtaposition of the end of their lives against the dawning of a new day and a new generation. The final segment brings us back to the Tyrannosaurus, and the female we saw earlier is now 1.5 years pregnant, traveling the seas with her first calf and some others of their kind. But the mother is having trouble keeping up as it comes time for her to give birth. Unfortunately, her struggles attract the attention of a nearby Caicaphilu, an animal I'm embarrassed to say I had to look up because I couldn't quite grasp the pronunciation from Attenborough. The mother descends to avoid her attacker, and her calf even goes as far as to distract the predator, buying her time. Just as it seems the Caicaphilu is about to ensnare the calf, the other members of their family arrive and mob the Mosasaur, driving it away with fierce bites to its back and sides. Now safe from attack, the Tyrannosaurus gives birth to a stark white baby, emerging neck first from the birth canal and still curled up in a fetal position. Mother and newborn ascend quickly so the calf can get its first breath of fresh air. And it is on this optimistic note that the episode concludes. Overall, this was a strong first impression and highlights many strengths I hope are present across the series. There's never been any doubt regarding the spectacle. The show has looked damn near immaculate from day one. Some of the shots are weaker than others. For example, any time animals interact with the water's surface, there's something that doesn't quite feel right. Also, during the Mosasaur fight scene, the battling leviathans don't seem to make contact with the surrounding reefs as much as they should. But this sort of thing is to be expected from a program of this nature, where visual effects are on screen nearly 100% of the duration. Most of the scenes were well written, though as discussed before, the Mosasaur segment feels disjointed. The episode does suffer from repetition despite its best efforts. 3 of the 5 segments all revolve around juveniles in peril, though I will admit that does make it all the more satisfying when the magical 3rd segment actually has the juveniles surviving. This may have been more effectively felt if those segments were more broken up, instead of going from one dead baby scene to another. There are some other issues I'll talk more about when I do a full series review, but for now this will have to suffice. All in all, I'd rate the episode a 4.3 out of 5. I was extremely pleased with how the episode turned out, and it made me even more excited for the next one. Make sure to check out Prehistoric Planet for yourself, and let me know in the comments below what you thought. What were the show's biggest strengths? What were its weaknesses? What could have been done better? I'll be back with another review for episode 2, at some point.